I'm here with Matías Blaustein and Julian Maxwell. Matías has a master's in philosophy, a master's and PhD in biology, and is a professor of biological chemistry at the University of Buenos Aires, where he heads the Cancer Systems Biology and Philosophy Lab. Julian Maxwell is finishing his PhD in physics and is the co-first author on their recent paper in Science, which proposes an intriguing explanation for why we see drastically different rates of cancer in some mammals versus others. Matías and Julian, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Of course, yeah. A little bit of context for the listener. I posted a short video of the paper's takeaways that did fairly well. And given the technical nature of many of the questions and comments that received, I felt it was best to do a deeper dive with both of you rather than putting my foot in your mouth trying to answer the questions, as it were. Before we dive into that paper, Matías, would you mind saying a bit about the philosophy of cancer, which is one of your specialties?
Basically, we try to address not only molecular dimensions, not only things related with biomedicine, but also environmental aspects, also social aspects, even ontological aspects, as why we have so many species with cancer. If cancer is something which is bad for the organism, why is that we have so many species, not only humans, that have these levels of cancer which are so high?
And what is the mainstream explanation for why that is?
Well, we have two mainstream explanations. One is called antagonistic pleiotropy. Basically, this explanation claims that, okay, cancer is something bad because if you have cancer, then you die earlier and maybe you can reproduce. But the same genetic variants that drive cancer, these genetic variants at earlier stage, they can be adaptive because maybe they allow you to grow fast or they allow you to reproduce. But then at later stages, okay, maybe they can trigger cancer, but selection is basically watching what these variants do at earlier stage. So in this antagonistic pleiotropy explanation, what is selected is not cancer, but the pleiotropic phenotypic things that these variants evoke. The other explanation is related with the fact that cancer normally arises when we are old. So normally the organisms that have a cancer, they already reproduced. So this hypothesis, this explanation says that cancer is somehow invisible for evolution.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, so cancer is a side effect. Under one explanation, cancer is a side effect of aspects of, let's say, faster growth and division that the organism evolution selects for that organism. And then dually so, the downsides usually occur after the organism is reproduced. And so evolution is quote unquote blind to it. However,
Exactly.
As I understand it, your paper proposes a much more intriguing explanation, which is that perhaps in addition to those effects, so sure, cancer could be just a side effect. Given that it occurs, though, cancer rates could actually be positively selected for by evolution rather than just evolution being blind to them. Is that a fair synopsis of kind of the through line of your paper?
Yeah, exactly. Basically, we try to understand this because we notice, and we are not the first in noticing this, that there are a lot of species that develop molecular mechanisms in order to resist cancer. This is the case of some species of whales, elephants, also bats, squirrels, mole rats, very different species, not related species. So this means that cancer is not necessary in a biological way or even in a metaphysical or ontological way. It's not necessary that we die from cancer.
Right. Evolution has found some solutions to it, and it doesn't correlate with what you'd expect to be the base drivers of cancer if it were purely a side effect of metabolism or growth or some other fundamental physical process.
Exactly. And the way that evolution found these ways are very different. You have different molecular mechanisms in order to avoid cancer. And in the other hand, you find these other species which seems to be like specialists in having cancer. They die from cancer, like carnivores, like lions, tigers, also some canids, like wolves. So why is that some species develop these mechanisms and some other not? This was basically our question, and not only our question, but in general, there is this new field called comparative oncology, which is trying to understand which are the main variables that co-evolve with cancer. So nobody before has tried to understand these, we call these traits, these variables, lifestyle traits, which are, behavioral traits. For example, if the species live together in cooperative groups, if they breed together, if they have only 1 liter and they give this liter full care, full attention, or if they have a big litter size. So there is a lot of competence between these liters. So we try to analyze and to understand if there is some kind of coevolution between these variables and those related to cancer.
So, I mean, I'm really interested in diving into those correlations and what the analysis found. First, you mentioned the types of mammals that have evolved lower cancer mortality rates, and they include a range of sizes, but I think the ones that get the most attention are the large ones, because if cancer were purely correlated with metabolism or growth, you'd expect elephants and whales and all the big mammals to have lots and lots of cancer, but that's not what we see, and that's termed Peto's or Peto's paradox. Could you say a few more words on why it's so puzzling, and why, in addition to the puzzle of cancer not scaling proportionally with body mass, that there's not obvious kind of patterns that hold up from those physical drivers? And we kind of have to, that's really what I think is so exciting about this and I'm kind of surprised this kind of work hasn't been published sooner and more frequently, because you would expect these patterns to arise, and the fact that they don't just kind of screams out for explanation. There's got to be something else that does a better job explaining the cancer mortality risk we see.
Yeah, exactly. As you mentioned, well, the first scientist that explored this was Sir Richard Peto. He found it is a good hypothesis. Okay, why some species have more cancer? Well, maybe those that have lots of cells. If you compare a mouse with a whale, since the size of the cells are basically the same, so the whale, in order to have a really massive body, the whales have to possess more cells. So cancer microevolves as a phenomenon in which the more errors you have, the more you expect to develop cancer. So if you have more cells, then you have more cell divisions. And in these cell divisions is when the errors appear, and so the whale and the elephant should have more cancer. But well, in these species that should have more cancer, we find the opposite, that they not only not have more cancer, but even that they have less cancer than other animals. So it's not necessarily about size. You have different examples resisting or fighting cancer. Small animals and big animals. And the same, you can mention different kind of animals, because the other hypothesis was okay, those that have a greater metabolic rate, since a greater metabolism enhances, for example, the reactive oxygen species, so this can harm the DNA and develop cancer. Well, again, you can find a correlation between metabolism and cancer. So our hypothesis was associated with this concept you mentioned before, which is phenoptosis. Phenoptosis is a concept in biology that most of biologists don't know. Actually, I noticed this concept like 2 or 3 years ago, and I really like it because it's a kind of a mechanism of plant obsolescence. The process of phenoptosis, which is similar to the apoptosis. The apoptosis is the programmed death of a cell. Here it is the programmed death of an organism. So it seems that evolution has fine-tuned how we should die in each species, and cancer is actually one of the ways which are easier to fine-tune because a lot of genes drive cancer. So it is really easy to find a mutation in this gene or the other gene in order to make a gene variant more prone to develop to trigger cancer or less prone, and then to influence the longevity of a given species.
Fascinating explanation for why we see such drastically different cancer rates across small, large, short-lived, long-lived, carnivores, non-carnivores, all kinds of different mammals. So maybe starting with the cooperative side, because I feel that that's a little bit more intuitive to understand. What are the patterns that you saw for the prevalence of cancer amongst mammals?
Well, exactly. The easiest way is to introduce the cooperative mammals, because we only studied mammals, not non-human mammals, and that's important to say. So the intuition, not only in scientists or molecular biologists, but normally if you ask a person, okay, you think that cancer is something good for the people, for the animal, for the evolution? And normally a person would answer, no, that's bad because it kills you. Maybe you can have children. The intuition is cancer is something bad. So if you model the 3-stage pre-reproductive juveniles, reproductive adults, and less reproductive adult, which we call seniors. How we model cancer? Okay, we increase the mortality of the seniors. It's not that all the seniors die of cancer. They die, obviously, from other things, but you can increase the mortality rates by increasing cancer, for example. So if you kill the seniors, increasing cancer mortality rates, okay, this is bad for the seniors. But in a cooperative model in which the seniors can help the juveniles to find food, or they can help the juveniles by protecting them from predators, so the seniors diminish the mortality rates of the juveniles. So then if you increase the mortality rate of the seniors, it's not only that the seniors die faster, but also the juveniles die or they cannot grow to be adults. So this is bad not only for the seniors, but for the whole population. And this is the intuitive explanation that you see. Okay, I increase cancer rates, and I see that not only the seniors die, but also the whole population goes down. That's okay?
That's very intuitive. Like there was a bowhead whale paper in Nature just a few weeks ago, and yeah, sure enough, it found they have enhanced DNA repair mechanisms. They have 100-fold of this specific protein that reduces the double-stranded DNA break mutations, which should lower cancer rates. And it makes sense that, mama or grandmother bowhead whale living longer, helping raise the youngest bowhead whales. That tracks totally with our intuition. Totally. Before we move on from the cooperative model, which is intuitive and I think makes sense, could you speak to what factors of cooperation had the strongest correlations with decreasing cancer mortality risk? Was it the length that it takes for a baby to be born? Was it the number of children? Was it the age until reproduction of the children? What were the factors that kind of correlate best so we can build our mental model?
So basically we found, if I'm not mistaken, 4 different variables related with cooperation. We found a strong correlation with cancer variables. We studied 3 different cancer variables. One is cancer mortality risk. The other one is prevalence of neoplasia, any kind of neoplasia. And the other one was
prevalence of tumors?
Yeah, exactly. And the other one was a prevalence of malignant tumors. Yes, we use different databases, public databases published in different Nature papers, cancer discovery papers, etc. Really beautiful papers. Then we compare this with different variables related with life history traits or lifestyle traits, and we found strong correlations with living in groups. It's not necessary that if you live in group, if you are a mammal species that live in group, it's not all about cooperation. You also have some kind of interspecific competition because you are in the same place. Sometimes you have a limit of resources, but in general, species that live in groups, let's see, for example, in buffaloes, they live together, and if you have lions, then the older individuals help all the group to protect from lions, and the older ones, they know where to find water or where to find food, and all the group benefits in a cooperative fashion from this kind of positive interaction. So living in groups, you have a strong correlation with cancer, with having lower levels of cancer. Then also breeding in groups. No, not all the species, only a part of the species breed together. We also have a correlation with this. Then gestation lengths, when not you, but a female that has a baby for a longer time, when that means that the female is giving protection for a longer time. We also found that the longer the time, the longer the gestation length, the lower the cancer incidence. And then, as you mentioned, this other variable, which is called litter size. For example, whales, elephants, and generally also humans, we only have 1 liter every time we reproduce. And in these cases, we found that species with only 1 or 2 liters, those are the species with lower cancer rates.
Because presumably they're putting more effort into each individual child. The reproductive success of each child is so important. It's not, you're not having 20
Exactly.
and losing 2 of them.
Exactly. And when you have a great litter size, you, as you mentioned, lose 1, 2, or 3 because of the competition, and also because the mother sometimes kill one of these litters. And well, there are a lot of things that are related with competition when you have larger litter size.
Awesome. Okay, yeah. Thank you. I feel like those are interesting correlates, and they track very nicely with our intuitions about where evolution would provide positive pressure to reduce cancer risk, because it's, altruistic behavior, raising young. That all makes a lot of sense. Let's turn now to, I feel like, the much less intuitive side, and the really striking thing about this modeling is how cancer would be positively selected for in competitive species, and perhaps help us understand what really defines competition in this sense.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like this work has a lot of interesting things. One is that cooperation somehow beats cancer. That's the main take-home message that a lot of people liked. But the other one is this one that you mentioned. Okay, so why a lot of species have cancer, and why there is a correlation between being competitive and having higher cancer levels. This is very important. What we found is a correlation. What we found is a coevolution. That means that we cannot say this is the cause of the other one. This is just a correlation. And then, with a lot of help from Julian, we developed this mathematical model, which is mathematical hypothesis. It is a mathematical mechanistic explanation, but it's not that things work this way. This is just an hypothesis. In fact, it is related, it is connected with the concept of phenoptosis, related with this obsolescence, this planned obsolescence. It is not as difficult to understand if we now think in the opposite example in the model. If we have the seniors, and now the seniors are this alpha, how do you say, alpha model, alpha individual, alpha predator.
Sure, alpha male is the
Alpha males,
the
exactly.
meme.
Exactly. You have alpha males that they don't reproduce as much as they used to, but they still consume a lot of food, like territorial. They don't let the other animals to feed. They don't let the other animals to reproduce. Sometimes they even kill some of the juveniles, which is something really common. For example, lions, sea lions. In those cases, when you enhance the mortality rate in our simulation, we model cancer increasing the mortality rates of seniors. Well, in this case, you have a reduction in the population, in the subpopulation of seniors, but then we find an overcompensation because now the juveniles and also the other adults, the reproductive adults, they can grow better because now they don't have the competence of these seniors. So this compensation, we call this the Hydra effect because the myth of the Hydra monster, in which you cut one of the heads of the Hydra, expecting the intuitive effect is that the Hydra monster dies, but instead of dying, this monster developed more heads. So this Hydra phenomenon, this Hydra effect, has been addressed a lot of times in the field of ecology, population ecology, but it has never been addressed in connection with cancer. So we've been the first ones in, okay, maybe this is interesting for cancer research. Actually, well, our hypothesis is that, okay, in this competitive species, increasing cancer mortality rates, which has a very strong impact on seniors, can be overcompensated by a drastic increase in juveniles, adults. Also, doing some models in which we model how evolution and selection and different gene variants, how they evolve during time. Well, we found that actually increasing the cancer mortality can be even selected like a positive effect, is that oncogenic gene variants can enhance fitness for those animals that possess this kind of gene variants. So that even explains why in some species, including humans, we have in the reservoir some gene variants that produce cancer.
And this is a very, very counterintuitive because you'd think if we're looking at, I'm not sure whether we should look at rats or maybe let's look at like a big cat just to bring the hypothesis down to an individual example. You're looking at a big cat that reproduces and you'd think, okay, there's all the Patagonian pumas down there in Chile. If one gene variant arises that, let's say, lowers its chances of cancer by 10% across the board, it's going to have a slightly increased chance to maybe reproduce another time and therefore spread more of its genes throughout its offspring. And you'd think that that would be a positively selected for trait. But what we find is actually the opposite tends to be true on when we look at the correlations between mammal lifestyles and cancer risk. And that could be because actually pumas are incredibly territorial. And so shortening the lifespan, it gets a gene variant that increases its cancer risk by 10%. And as opposed to decreasing the chance that its genes proliferate as a result, it actually means old daddy puma dies a little bit sooner and maybe commits less infanticide of its offspring or frees up that territory for its offspring to hunt in and generally actually increases the survival odds and the reproduction odds of its little baby pumas, even though it seems very counterintuitive. It seems like shortening that lifespan can only lead to less of its genotype spreading. Is that a fair, if we were to apply this?
In a nutshell, it's perfect example. Because you have the concomitant effects of both a cancer increase in the individual senior, let's say, puma. We also have pumas here in Argentina. Patagonia is Chile and Argentina, very important distinction. And well, of course, you have the concomitant increase then also in the ecological consequences of this increased just as you said, like maybe killing its own offspring or other offspring of other pumas, or just what sería the word in English? Like being very greedy with its resources, no? Like that would be the explanation of why cancer may have that rate and not another one. It's like in equilibrium with other stuff. We are not just looking the physiological puma to calculate its fitness. We are looking a little bit. It's a less nearsighted definition, let's say, of fitness.
Right.
That's very important, because when you think about fitness, biological fitness, it's not only about survival, longevity, but it's also about the capacity of creating new offspring. So if you increase longevity, but then the decrease in the offspring capacity is bigger than the increase in the longevity, well, then you can see why it's not all about increasing longevity.
Makes perfect sense. Yeah. Yeah. You got to look at the whole genotype, not just the individual.
Exactly. And you can think about this in terms of group selection. Okay, this is bad for the daddy puma, as you mentioned, but it's good for the rest of the group or the species. But even if you think just in daddy puma was first a young puma before being a daddy puma. So this kind of variants made this young puma. It changed the possibility that this younger puma get old and become a daddy puma.
And I think there's kind of a riddle here. I know that humans, Homo sapiens, were not included in this modeling, but I do want to just kind of throw this question up to you, which is, we seem a bit paradoxical in that primates are both like intensively cooperative and intensely competitive. Like chimps wage warfare on other tribes, and there's a lot of intra-troop violence in chimps, and yet they're one of the few species to evolve menopause, seemingly because the older chimps provide such a benefit to the tribe that it's worth keeping. They increase the fitness of their offspring, so much so that evolution engineered this really elaborate solution to actually prevent them from reproducing, which seems like it wouldn't be positive, but their value is just so high late in life that it seems that it is. So with kind of that paradox of a lot of cooperation and a lot of competition, where do Homo sapiens, and maybe if it's easier to talk about primates, because I know we complicate things with culture and our knowledge a lot, but how do we think about primates given that paradox of our cooperation and competition?
Yeah, it is a good and an interesting question. It is obviously speculative territory. It is important to mention this. But yes, we have a lot of differences between primates. You can find primates with really high cancer incidence and other primates with very low or zero cancer prevalence. And yes, in fact, we have these really which are the chimpanzees, but we also have the bonobos, which are really peaceful and they live in groups. So there is a lot of things to think about it. I personally really think that the human species is a cooperative species, that we evolved the Homo sapiens as a cooperative species. What I think is that nowadays we have like 1 in 6 persons that die because of cancer. But now we live, depending on the country, until 60 or 70 or 80. I feel, or I think that when Homo sapiens evolved as a species, like 200,000 years ago, you can think that normally you died at those times because you have a wound, and then you die because of bacteria or virus, or maybe you were eaten by a lion, or anything you had.
Right.
You didn't have like healthcare attention.
Our background hazard rate was so high that cancer is not very high on the list of things that evolution is pressured to select against,
Exactly.
given you're more often dying of disease or violence or predation,
Exactly.
starvation.
1 or 2 centuries ago, the life expectancy of humans was like 30 or 40. So it's not improbable that 200,000 years ago, maybe our life expectancy was 30, 40. In those cases, the chance of dying of cancer was really low. And this correlates with being a cooperative species, but it's
Right.
speculation.
Right. No, that makes total sense. Our natural environment lifespan actually has fairly low cancer mortality, and we're only seeing so much of it now because we're pushing up against what our longevity upper limits are given modern medicine and agriculture.
Exactly. And this is also important. We are creating a really carcinogenic world in which you are all the time exposed to different carcinogenic elements, air pollutants, water pollutants, etc. So now you can see that in the last 30 years, we have 22% more cases of cancer around the world. Most of the poor countries, you have increased cancer mortality rates than before. I think that this kind of world, this kind of model is increasing cancer levels in the Homo sapiens and also in some other species as well.
Okay, one other question that a lot of people had, and I think it's a pretty understandable, maybe misunderstanding, is they were saying, well, a competitive lifestyle, let's think about rats, I don't know, constantly competing for food and resources, stealing it from one another. I live in New York City, so plenty of pigeons I see doing that all the time out here. That competitive lifestyles induce high levels of chronic stress, which we know that is carcinogenic. So is it possible that the correlation with competitive lifestyles is due to the intra lifespan stressors of a competitive lifestyle versus it being hard coded into the genome? And I think I have an answer for this, but I'd like to hear you kind of dispel this notion.
Yeah, this is a really good question. A lot of people that approach to me ask me this, and I also saw this in the comments in your posts. Of course, there is a correlation between stress and immunosuppression and cancer levels. And it is makes sense that under conditions of high interspecific competence, you have more stress and then more immunosuppression and then more increased cancer levels. We discussed a few minutes ago the Petos paradox, and we mentioned, okay, whales should have more cancer because they have more cells and elephants the same. So these animals that have increased cancer levels, why is that they didn't evolve mechanisms in order to resist cancer? Why only whales, elephants, naked mole rat? So you can think, okay, maybe it is stress, but why they don't have mechanisms in order to fight cancer?
Right. Spot on. And I was also wondering if you take them out of the stressful environment and kind of just lower the environmental stressors so that food is a little more plentiful, intraspecies competition is a little less competitive, you still see the same genetic risk, or you still see the same rates of cancer arise. And so that points to like, oh, this is a longer term kind of genetic thing.
Yeah. You have a really good point there, because mostly these are species which are studied in captivity. So in these cases, they are not competing. They have food. So they can have cancer because of other things, but not necessarily because of competition. Yeah, that's also a really important question.
Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you think we should cover? Anything I've failed to ask that you think is an interesting point to make here?
No, you don't fail at all.
You're too kind.
No, maybe two other things just to mention.
Mm.
This is really a really nice interdisciplinary work. We have mathematicians, people who works on physics, on evolution, statistics, molecular biology. This was really nice to work together. It was like playing together. It was really a lot of fun doing this work. What it wasn't so fun was trying to do science here in Argentina in a moment in which this government I think this is similar in United States. The government cut all the budgets, all the funding. Our salaries are really, really low. So it was really difficult to investigate, to research here in Argentina. So it's like a miracle to publish a science advances paper from Argentina in these conditions is like a miracle.
Huge props to you. I've been following some of the Malay changes from a distance, but I'm sorry to hear you're going through some of the same just shooting ourselves in the foot kind of science cuts over there that we're experiencing here. So congratulations on that. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me here, answer some of these questions that came up, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
very much.
It was really nice when we saw for the first time the post in Instagram and TikTok. It was okay. This is amazing because, as I mentioned to you, it was really accurate and it was cool with all the videos and images. I have a friend of mine who told me, okay, you should write Ian in order to, I don't know, to make an interview or something. And you first email to me. So thank you so much. For us, it's really very important to have our ideas in different social media. So thank you so much.
I'm so glad I could be of some use and not bungle up your study too much. Thanks so much.
See you.